Dear colleague, dear student, this course is on biodiversity informatics data. The outline of its presentation is as follows. First, I will give an introduction to remind you on biodiversity and its importance to people and underline with risk to biodiversity. Second, I will remind you of biodiversity informatics as one of the initiatives taken at the global, regional, and national level to alleviate threats to biodiversity. I will, at the further part, talk to you on data types involved in biodiversity informatics. The course is divided into two parts. The first part concerns the introduction, biodiversity informatics, data types involved in biodiversity informatics, and here, environmental data. As you already know, biodiversity is of utmost importance to the survival of humanity through important services that it provides to the survival of people. As a reminder, biodiversity is defined and measured at three levels. You have the level of genetic diversity, the level of species diversity, and the level of ecosystem diversity. I also underline that between those three levels of diversity, there are, and also inside them, there are interactions going on and causing constantly evolving realities. Biodiversity provides important services to people. The first one I will talk about is the provisioning ecosystem services. That includes products obtained from ecosystems such as food, crops, raw materials, woods, genetic resources, etc. From the recent report on global forest resources of FAO and also from the regional assessment report on biodiversity and ecosystem services to Africa elaborated by the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBES. Biodiversity provides important services to people. For example, it is estimated that more than 500 billion cubic meter is, let's say, are stored in forest. And out of this, 76 billion of cubic meters are stored in the forest in Africa. Biodiversity provides also regulating ecosystem services to people. For instance, in storing carbon in above and below ground, in above ground and below ground of forest biomass. It is indeed estimated by FAO 2020 that more than 600 gigaton of carbon are stored in the forest biomass. At the scale of Africa, it is more than 80 gigaton of carbon. Imagine that all those carbons are released in the atmosphere. This will make, let's say, life very difficult on Earth. So the important role played by ecosystem, forest ecosystem, which, as you know, is a part of biodiversity. We can also talk about the cultural ecosystem services provided by biodiversity. There are non-material benefits people obtain from ecosystem through, for instance, spiritual enrichment, recreation, tourism, due to the aesthetic value of the landscape. There are also supporting services that are necessary for the production of all the services we talked about above. There are, for instance, the primary production, the nutrient dispersal and cycling, soil protection, seed dispersal, water cycling, etc. Despite its utmost importance to the survival of people, biodiversity is submitted, unfortunately, to threats. Generally, we have we we are used to talk about five threats, but there is one more, and I'm going to let's say details this to you. The first one is habitat fragmentation. Habitat fragmentation is, let's say, related to the loss of forests, for instance. And the rate of forest loss is still very high. During the last decade, 2010-2022, about 7 million hectares of forests were destroyed per, per year. And Africa, unfortunately, contribute to 60% of this loss. Another threat is ecosystem overexploitation. From the report of FAO on the state of world fisheries and aquaculture, we can say that nearly five-fold increase in global marine fish catch left many fisheries overexploited. Another threat to biodiversity is related to invasive alien species. And here, Pimentel et al. In 2001 evaluated the economic and environmental threats of alien plant, animal, and microbe invasion across the world. They found out that the annual environmental losses caused by introduced pests in the United States, United Kingdom, Australia, South Africa, India, and Brazil have been calculated at over than $100 billion. So this loss is annual. Okay, it is per year. Another threat to biodiversity is related to alien invasive alien species, as I said, but this is the example of water hyacinth. Yes, it all reviewed the impact of water hyacinth on hydrology ecosystem services, taking the case of the Lake Tanya in Ethiopia. From their study, they declared that the species, that is water hyacinth, native to the Amazon basin, has invaded almost all the continents with appreciable environmental impact. Indeed, water hyacinth blocks waterways, decimates aquatic wildlife, and the livelihoods of local people, and creates ideal conditions for disease and its vectors. It is quite unfortunate. And from our last research on that species in Benin, we understand that all the waterways of Benin are invadable by that species. And of course, it is spreading and spreading. I don't know, maybe it's also already existing in Malawi. Another threat to biodiversity is climate change. Climate change is considered as the drivers of the overall threats to biodiversity. It is important then to tackle this very seriously. Indeed, warming trends in temperature and climate-related extremes, such as heat waves, droughts, floods, cyclones, and the wildfire, are being observed at the global scale and across the region. From the recent report on climate change of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change (IPCC), and they also added that these effects are known to particularly affect the poorest regions like several African countries. So we are concerned, and then impacting agricultural production and causing risk of ill human health and death. Yes, I count on you that during your research activities, you can tackle seriously climate change as the main drivers for biodiversity loss so that to derive sound, reliable, relevant research results to inform decision on actions to take, okay, to alleviate climate change and then conserve more and more sustainably biodiversity in your country, in Africa. Another threat to biodiversity is pollution. And from the report of IPCC, please, the report of IPBES on biodiversity and ecosystem services for Africa, it is clear that pollution is an important threat to biodiversity loss. Indeed, through use of biocides, industrial farming practices affecting soil fertility, soil acidification, for instance, disruption of aquatic life by fertilizers, oil spills, etc. Another factor found that affect biodiversity are disease affecting animals, plants, and people. Anyway, the recent case and ongoing case of COVID-19 is quite informative. Yes, to face all this, those threats to biodiversity, and to try to combat them or alleviate their impact on biodiversity, there are some initiatives taken at the global, regional, and also national level. The first one I would like to remind you of is biodiversity informatics. Biodiversity informatics, as you know, is the application of informatics techniques to biodiversity information, including data capture in order to improve data management, data presentation, data discovery, data exploration, and data analysis so as to provide research products to inform decision in the context of climate and global changes. Biodiversity informatics is therefore a field of investigation capable of integrating information on the different threats we examined into research problems so as to derive products to guide decision. Here, I can count on you that during your research works, you will focus on the threats to biodiversity and try from your results to address some of them to inform decision. An other initiative taken at the global level to alleviate the impact of climate change, the impact of global change on biodiversity is GBIF, Global Biodiversity Information Facility, a mega infrastructure to support biodiversity informatics. It is an international network and data infrastructure founded by the world's government in 2001 and aimed at providing anyone, anywhere, open access to data about all types of life on Earth. Actually, GBIF has, let's say, the biggest database, about 2 billion of occurrence data in its database. My colleague Andrew from GBIF Secretariat will go into more details concerning GBIF with you. Now, we come to biodiversity informatics data, having said all this about biodiversity, it treats to biodiversity, importance of biodiversity, and despite it treats to biodiversity, the different initiative taken. Now, let us talk about biodiversity informatics data. Here, I will rely on a scientific publication of Soberon et Peterson, 2005. Professor Soberon and Professor Peterson Town are authorities in the field of biodiversity informatics. According to them, four classes of factors affect the distribution of a species. We have abiotic factors, in terms of climate, topography, soils, etc. We have also biotic factors such as interaction between species. We have then competition, mutualism, disease, population dynamics, etc. And also we have the accessibility of a species to the area of study from original distribution areas in ecological time. And here it is supposed that seeds and dispersers are available, and also the movement of species are possible in the absence of barriers. The fourth factor we talked about is the evolutionary capacities of species to adapt to new environments. So with respect to those factors, they lay the BAM diagram. And on this diagram, the green circle represents the geographic region with the appropriate set of abiotic factors for the species. It is the geographic expression of a fundamental niche. And the blue circle, B, is a region where the right combination of interacting species occur. It may overlap or not with abiotic factors. The intersection between A and B, in other words, the intersection between abiotic and biotic factors, represent the geographic extent of a realized niche of a species. That is, the species where the species can survive. M, the red circle, is composed of those parts of the world accessible to the species with respect to their ecology. And this is possible, this accessibility is possible in the absence of barriers to movement and colonization. The intersection between those three ensembles, that is A, B, and M, represent P. P is the region that has the right set of biotic and abiotic factors, and that is accessible to the species, and it is equivalent to the geographic distribution of the species. So, this representation is quite fundamental in ecological niche modeling. And I will refer to that to talk to you about biodiversity informatics data. Let us talk about the environmental data. The environmental data can be on climatic factors, that is rainfall, relative humidity, temperature, etc. And there is an official site called World Clean Site. You have here the URL of the site, the address of the site here. The last release was done by Fick and Ishmans in 2017, and it is titled World Clean 2, New 1 kilometer Spatial Resolution Climate Surfaces for Global Land Areas. On the site, there are monthly climate data for minimum, mean, and maximum temperature, precipitation, solar radiation, wind speed, water vapor pressure, and for total precipitation. On the right side of the slide, it is how the site looks like. And the table, let's say below, indicates you, okay, the different variables I just talked about at different resolution. Resolution of 30 seconds, that corresponds approximately at the equator, it corresponds approximately to 1 kilometer times 1 kilometer size. The resolution of 2.5 minutes approximately correspond to 5 kilometers, 5 times 5 kilometers. So it is a cell of a resolution, okay, the size of a cell. And the resolution of 5 minutes, that is approximately about 10 kilometers times 10 kilometers, and 10 minutes, 20 kilometers times 20 kilometers. The resolution are important. What I want to clarify to you is that during your research work, you have to choose the appropriate resolution. And this will depend much on the density of your occurrence data. If, for instance, the mean distance between occurrence points in your data is 1 kilometer, you will choose the resolution of 30 seconds, okay, to download your, let's say, the environmental data. If the mean distance between occurrence points is about 5 kilometers, then you choose the resolution of 2.5 minutes to download your environmental variable, and etc. If it is 5 minutes, that is the mean distance between occurrence points in your data, occurrence data, is about 10 kilometers. And if it is 10 minutes, that corresponds to the mean distance, roughly correspond to a mean distance of 20 kilometers between occurrence points. But you will see this in details with let's say your supervisors, especially with let's say my colleague that will be in charge of ecological niche modeling with you. Okay. On the sheet, what claim sheet, you have also 19 bioclimatic variables. And yes, at the same resolution I already talked about, you have to take care to correspond the resolution of the environmental variables to also the mean distance between occurrence points in your data when you decide to analyze them. Okay. It is maybe good also to add that the data actually on AfriClim correspond to the period of 1970 to 2000. Okay. And it has been released on the site in January of January 2020. So it is one of the most recent data. Just when you download data on temperature, for instance, minimum temperature, you have 12 variables. Okay, the first one is related, there are monthly variables, okay? The first one is related to January, second one, February, third one, etc. The 12th one refers to December. You have to understand this, okay? When talking about the 19 bioclimatic variables, when you download them, it looks like this, what you have on the figure on the right side. You have variables bio 1 till bio 19 from Africlim site. What are those variables? Just a quick explanation. Bio 1 is the annual mean temperature. Bio 2 is the mean diurnal range. The range is the difference between the maximum temperature and the minimum temperature. Okay, but it is, let's say, calculated monthly, and then the mean over the year is calculated. Bio 3 is isothermality. That is the proportion of the mean diurnal range, okay, to the annual temperature range. As you can see, Bio 7 is the annual range. Bio 3 is isothermality, and yes, it is what I just talked about. Okay, Bio 4 is the temperature seasonality or variability of seasonality. Bio 5 is the maximum temperature of the warmest month. Bio 6, the mean temperature of the coldest month. Bio 8, the mean temperature of wettest quarter. I want to draw your attention on this and try to explain to you what is their importance, okay, when talking about ecological niche. Bio 10 is the mean temperature of warmest quarter. Bio 11, the mean temperature of coldest quarter. Bio 12, the annual precipitation. Bio 13, precipitation of wettest month. Bio 14, the precipitation of driest month. Bio 15, the precipitation seasonality, the variability of the precipitation over the year, yes. Bio 16, the precipitation of wettest quarter. Bio 17, precipitation of driest quarter. Bio 18, precipitation of a warmest quarter. Bio 19, precipitation of a coldest quarter. Okay, I highlight some of them in red: Bio 8, Bio 9, Bio 18, Bio 19. And because those variables are not considered when I will talk to you about Africlim very soon, they are not considered by Africlim because they found out that they are not relevant to the ecology of species in Africa. Okay, the importance of bioclimatic variables with respect to climatic variables only is that they are more relevant to the ecology of a species. When you talk about, for instance, okay, about temperature seasonality, how temperature vary, okay, the variability of let's say, temperature along the year can affect the ecology, physiology of a species. Okay, when you talk about, for instance, precipitation of a wettest month, it can be also quite relevant to some species, for instance. Okay, it can be a threshold for survival, for instance, as well as precipitation of dry month, etc. And what I want to point out here is that you need to understand fully the ecology of a species you have in hand to, let's say, achieve your ecological niche modeling. You need to understand, to review the literature, to understand clearly its ecology, and so that you can choose the appropriate bioclimatic variable, okay, relevant to the species. As you will see, bioclimatic variables or climatic variables are not sufficient. to characterize the ecological niche of species. You need to consider other factors. I will come to that later. Now, let us talk about Africlim. Africlim was elaborated by Platts and his collaborators in 2015. Okay, they did so because they found out that Africa has some particular ecological conditions, so that it is important to downscale the general circulation model of world climate to fit them, to fit more the realities of Africa, made of high population densities and biodiversity in mountains and coastal regions. So, from general circulation model, we try to, let's say, collect more data, use the appropriate techniques to downscale the general circulation models to fit them to Africa, and then to have a regional model, okay, more suitable to Africa region. Okay, I encourage you anyway to use it. You can use it and compare with Africlim and find out uh, the difference between them. So you will need to visit the site of Africlim, and as pointed out, okay, excuse me. The Africlim data are also available at the different resolution I already talked about. 30 second, 1 kilometer, 60 second, that is 2.5 minutes, and 150 second, 5 minutes, 300 minutes, that is 10 minutes, 10, yes, 10 minutes, and 20 minutes for the last. So they are available at the same resolution as world climate data. And there, here, okay, two scenarios are considered. That is RCP. RCP is a representative concentration pathway, 4.5 and 8.5. There are some, let's say, in each scenario is linked to some hypotheses on the effort of mitigation of the government, effort of mitigation of climate change by government. So under SCP 4.5, it is supposed that the government will make some efforts, okay, to address, okay, climate change. And SCP 8.5 is the pessimist scenario that suppose that the government won't make enough efforts, okay, to alleviate the effect of climate change. And accordingly, the model of climate evolution, okay, let's say the model, okay, for climate change, the evolution of climate is according to the different hypotheses. For instance, under the most pessimist, uh, let's say, condition, the temperature will rise up to maybe 4 degrees by 200 and by 20, yes, by 2100, okay, by 2100, okay, the temperature will rise up to about 4 degrees. So those scenarios are considered for some horizon, for instance, 2055, that horizon, let's say, the evolution of climate is, let's say, achieved in the model, and also to the horizon 2085. When achieving ecological niche modeling, you will need to consider them, maybe with two scenarios and compare, maybe also with two horizons, and compare them so as to derive results, let's say research results to guide the decision. Okay. You will see this with your supervisors, your advisors. Okay. Yeah, you can use among the different models a Clim ensemble. Okay, the version 3 from WordClim, and you use the mean value, and that will be helpful for you. Okay. On the table, let's say in the right side and below, you have a different variables. MBO is about the moisture bioclimatic variables, so those, let's say, related to precipitation. Okay. And TBO is related to temperature, bioclimatic variables. PR related to precipitation. TS max is the maximum temperature. And the TS min, the minimum temperature. That is, let's say, the temperature of the air, okay, in the 2 meter, okay, above ground, etc. You have to choose, okay, the appropriate variable you need. Now on WordClim, you have data about future, and there are some models that achieve the evolution, probable evolution of climate under the different scenario. You have different, let's say, model here, and I will give you an exercise to try to understand the difference between the different models. There are 9 global climate circulation model. Okay, and you will have to use them and then compare, let's say, the evolution of the climate under each of the model with respect to the present, for instance. And the models are achieved for 4 shared socioeconomic pathways. The shared socioeconomic pathways are scenarios of the evolution of climate. For instance, the shared socioeconomic pathway 1 is roughly approximated to the RCP, representative concentration pathway 2.6, and the shared socioeconomic pathway 2 roughly corresponds to RCP 4.5. The shared socioeconomic pathway 3 roughly corresponds to RCP 7.0, and the shared socioeconomic pathway 5 roughly corresponds to RCP 8.5. You will also have to compare those scenarios, okay, either the shared socioeconomic pathway and also the RCP. You need to understand this. Okay, with respect to those variables, the monthly values were averaged over 20 years period. So you'll have for a period 2021 to 2040, the second period, okay, from 2041 to 2060, third period 2061 to 2080, and the fourth period 2081 to 2100. And they are also available at the different resolution, 2.5 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. The resolution of 30 seconds is not yet available on the site, although they say that it should be released by March 2020. Okay, anyway, I don't find it on the sheet. Okay, after this first part, we'll do some exercises to download the data and try also to calibrate them. Oh, yes, I want to tell you that those variables are at the world scale. So to use them for Malawi or parts of Malawi, you need to calibrate them, okay, with the outline or administrative, let's say, limits of Malawi, for instance, or anyway, with respect to the species of your interest, you have to take into account the extent of the occurrence data to calibrate, okay, the environmental variables. When you go forward, you have GCM on the table. GCM is General Circulation Models. There are 9, as I talked to you about. You have the different scenarios. SSP1, roughly corresponding to RCP 2.6, and so on and so forth. And you have a different variables. Tn is the minimum temperature. Okay. Tx is about the maximum temperature. PR is about the precipitation. BC is about bioclimatic variables. When you click on them, okay, then you will download with the appropriate data. Try, yes, to find out what is in sight. We will do it, okay, after, okay, this video. And yes, we'll have an idea of this. We can also try to calibrate it at the limit. You can try to calibrate them at the limit of your country, okay, so that you have a clear idea on what it contains. Now, let us talk about the non-climatic environmental factor that concern land cover, elevation, inland water, soil topography, okay, population, etc. Here, I try to point out here some scientific publication, that of Blackover and her collaborators, okay, published on determinants of palm species distribution across Africa, the relative roles of climate, non-climatic, environmental factors, and spatial constraints. I invite you to read it, but anyway, it is quite interesting. And they took into account some barriers of the palm dispersal and how they use it. It is important for you to read the paper. Anyway, it is quite interesting. You will have to face the same realities with respect to other species, and it is important to know how you can proceed. Okay. We have also a scientific paper, let's say from the from the environment of Professor Town and Professor Soberon, on the crucial role of the accessible area in ecological niche modeling and species distribution modeling. As I talked to you about, okay, accessibility of species to the area of distribution is one of the important factors to be considered. So Barvet all, okay, try to talk about this, to describe this, okay, and it is important to take this into account when you are achieving the models of your species of interest. Now, as for physical barriers, it is important this, let's say, I talked to you about, okay, the physical barriers and accessibility. The accessibility M, remember in the Baum diagram, okay, it is related to M, okay, the movement. Okay. And here you have a scientific paper on the phylogeography and ecological niche modeling that reveal the evolutionary history of Leilo, please excuse me, Leiolepsis ocellata, which is a reptile. You need to consider this and read this and read it and let's say understand how, let's say, they take into account the different, let's say, barriers, okay, in the achieving the ecological niche modeling of a species. Another publication is on application of ecological niche modeling for species delimitation, a review and empirical evaluation using Dejico from Madagascar. And one of the authors, the last one is Pearson, who is a great personality in the field of biodiversity informatics. Talking about the physical barriers to dispersal, it consists of landscape features that prevent organisms from relocating. There are, for instance, mountains, rivers, lakes, etc. We can have also anthropogenic barriers like roads, farming, river dams, etc. that function also as impediment to the movement of species. Yes, you have some important sites, for instance, devices sit to download non-environmental factor. Okay, for instance, on this site, you have its address there. You can download the administrative area, for instance, inland water, roads, railways, railroads, elevation, okay, land cover, population, the gazetteer, etc. You can download this from this site. And you have to, let's say with respect to this menu, okay, you can try to click on it and choose your country, Malawi, and download the appropriate environmental layer suitable for you. You can also download data on soil from FAO site. Okay, I give also, let's say, the address of the site here, the URL. You can download it. What here, let's say the variable at is the variables are at the world scale, so you have to calibrate them to your country or your study area. Okay, and also this sheet concerning soils International Soil Reference and Information Center, ISRIC. I recommend this to you. It is even more updated than the sheet of FAO, because when I explore the sheet, you can have data updated, okay, as recently as 2020. So, and then you download the data at the world scale, and you calibrate this to, let's say, to your area of interest. Okay. Now, what is about the biotic factors? Here, it is about competition between species, mutualism, population dynamics, etc. Yes, please refer to the scientific papers I try to select to you here. First one is from Superon and Peterson, interpretation of models of fundamental ecological niche and species distribution area. And the second one is about niche and area of distribution modeling, a population ecology perspective from Superon. We will find out how, let's say, they try to solve the problems of biotic factors in ecological niche modeling. Okay. Other papers, scientific papers I try to select to you, concern the advances and limitation of disease biogeography using ecological niche modeling. Quite interesting. Okay. So disease affect also the ecological niche model. It is a factor, biotic factor to be considered. Okay. And you will see with, let's say, my colleague in charge of ecological niche modeling, how to concretely deal with those cases in practice. Okay. You have also a paper on spatial ecology, the role of space in population dynamics, and the interspecific interaction by David Tillman. It is a book, and Peter Careva. Okay. So you need to read this, okay? As any researcher, okay, need to read and try to update his knowledge. It is important. So this is the end of the first part of my presentation. And yes, the course also of today ends here for the theoretical for the presentation. And now, after this, we'll have a break and then go on practical exercises on those different environmental data I talked to you about, so that you have a clearer idea, okay, on them. Thank you.